Hi, my name is Azra Hafiz, your TiNKA educator. Welcome to TiNKA Like Boss series. Before we begin, don't forget to follow our social media. Press the like button and follow our Facebook and Instagram on the link below. So let's start. Hi, welcome to TiNKA Like Boss series. Today we're gonna learn about respiration of insects, human, and amphibians. In this topic, we're gonna understand how the breathing mechanism of other animals aside from us. You've already learned in the previous studies about how fish breathe. Now we're gonna focus more on the insects. So in insects, we find this structure in the abdomen of the insect. So your insects are separated into three parts. We have the head of the insect, the thorax of the insect, as well as the abdomen of the insect. And on the surface of the abdomens, we have tiny holes that allow for the insect to carry out gaseous exchange. These tiny holes allow oxygen to enter and carbon dioxide to escape. Now, your insect are able to sustain the amount of air within its body for a long period of time. And of course, when I said that, I don't mean that it can go for 1 hour without air. They can actually go with low oxygen concentration. The reason being is because of a structure called air sac that is found within their breathing mechanism. And this air sac allows for them to store the air that is needed for their metabolism. And this air sac is important because as insects travel underground, the concentration of air is much lesser. Some insects, they go to areas where the concentration of gases that are much more poisonous are around, and they can thrive in those kind of environment. The reason being is because when they go to oxygen-rich environment, they will store as much of the oxygen that they can. And so your insect will carry out their daily life. So this structure consists of the spiracle. This spiracle is an opening on the surface of your insect, like I mentioned earlier. And this is where the oxygen will come into it and then follow the path towards the trachea. And some of it are stored in air sac and the rest travel further to the tracheal. Your insect has a open-ended circulatory mechanism where everything is connected to the rest of the body cell through a liquid medium called hemolymph. And this hemolymph, they flooded over the body cells of the insect, and this allow for the oxygen to immediately enter the cells and the carbon dioxide to escape from the cell. Similar as how you've seen in the fish, this flow go following the concentration gradient where simple diffusion takes place. Carbon dioxide escape from your cell and oxygen enter. So this carbon dioxide then travel back through the tracheal, enter the trachea, and then out from the spiracle. Now, what happens is that your trachea for the insect is similar to human. Now, let's take a look at the animation how the respiration takes place. Now, as you can see here, they talk about the cuticle that is found within the insect, and that cuticle is basically the trachea structure. Now, as you can see, the trachea is found throughout the abdomen of the insect, the back side, on this side, and on the other side. So we know that our insects are basically exoskeleton. They are hard structure, and so is the trachea. They are made of the cuticle. Now, oxygen will then enter the spiracle, like I mentioned earlier. And this spiracle is similar as how your nostrils are. They can open and close. Your nostril cannot open and close, but the air can enter through your nostril, the same mechanism. So as you can see, they are connected through a series of tracheal towards the body cell. And this allows for the continuous supply of oxygen to the body cell of the insect. Some insects, they require a higher amount of oxygen, for example, grasshoppers, because they use up the oxygen to allow them to jump across a large distance. The same thing for insects that can fly. They really need a high concentration of oxygen. Now we're going to take a look at how your frog respire on a daily basis. So for frogs and salamanders, they are considered as amphibians. Most of them can live both on land and in water. The frogs can also live in muddy area. So for frogs, how they survive through muddy area is that they have an additional respiratory system aside from your pulmonary, which is similar like us, we breathe through our lung. And this cutaneous respiration uses up oxygen exchange or gas exchange across the surface of their skin. So on the surface of their skin, they have a very thin layer of cells that allow for exchange to take place. This special characteristic of the skin behind their body, it's actually one cell thick. They are rich in blood capillary. And they are moist in nature. This allows oxygen to enter and carbon dioxide to escape. And usually they carry out this kind of respiration whenever they are inside mud or they are underground, where oxygen concentration is really low. So this exchange allows the frogs to remain hidden from their predators or for them to mate during mating season. Let's take a look at the video how this exchange takes place. So here, the skin is permeable to gases, and as you can see, oxygen enters through the pore of the skin and diffuse into the blood capillary. So this diffusion takes place simultaneously. So as you can see here, the skin of a frog is always moist, and this allows for a more efficient gaseous exchange. And this moisture of the skin is contributed by the gland, mucus gland that is found throughout the back of this frog. Now, some frogs are hibernating animals that hibernates throughout winter. When they hibernate, their respiratory system does not operate normally. So what they do is that they uses up this cutaneous respiration at 100%, where the surface of the soil is blanketed by snow, allowing for the frog to only uses up the cutaneous respiratory mechanism compared to the pulmonary. Now we're going to take a look at how the frog respire through pulmonary respiration. So through pulmonary respiration, what the frog does is that they take in gas or air through their nose. So when air enters the nostril, what they do is that the epiglottis closes. So when the epiglottis closes, what happens is that you're going to create a low pressure in buccal cavity. So when the pressure inside the buccal cavity is lower than the environment, air rushes into the buccal cavity and they fill up the buccal cavity. So as air enters your buccal cavity, the buccal cavity expanded. So this expansion of buccal cavity allows the frog to take in a lot of air from the environment. So next, what they do is that they closes up the nostril. And they open the epiglottis. So as you close the nostril and you open the epiglottis, what happened? Now the pressure inside the buccal cavity is higher. So now you have high pressure within buccal cavity. And you're going to have low pressure in lung. So what happened? Now your air is pushed into lung. Now, as the air enter the lung, gaseous exchange takes place similar to human. We're going to talk that in greater depth when we go to the mammalians. Now let's take a look at how the pulmonary respiration of frogs taking place. So here, as you can see, the buccal cavity can expand, and as air enter, the buccal cavity gets filled up. The lower end of the mouth can actually go down, allowing for the buccal cavity to expand as large as it can. So here you can see there's epiglottis. And this epiglottis acts as a sphincter that closes and opens the passage between the buccal cavity and the lungs. Gaseous exchange takes place in the lung, and then it re-enters the buccal cavity and exit from the nose. Stop. Alright, now we're going to take a look at human respiration, or mammals. We can see this in mammals, and as I've mentioned earlier, that we see this type of mechanism in frogs as well. But here, we can also add birds. Even though the respiration of birds is a bit weird compared to human, because they have a lower density bone structure, they need to respire in both low atmospheric pressure and high atmospheric pressure when they fly in the air. So we're not going to talk about birds too much. We're just going to talk about how the respiration of respiratory mechanism, where it involves the lung and the rib cage, right? So this is a typical human structure. So we have our nostril, we have the trachea, we have bronchus, and then we have bronchiole. And at each end of the bronchiole, we have our alveolus. And all of this is contained inside the lung. Underneath here, we have our diaphragm. These are the typical structure of your respiratory structure. So in the human respiration, we call this pulmonary respiration, where we use our lung. And how the passage goes is that it enters from nose down to the trachea, or you can put the in-between, which is the pharynx, which is your epiglottis. Here we have our larynx. This is the one that separates between your air passage and your digestive passage. And then from trachea, it goes to bronchus, and then bronchiole, and then alveolus. This is for oxygen. For carbon dioxide passage, it's just a reverse process. So from alveolus down to bronchiole, bronchiole to bronchus, bronchus to trachea, trachea to nose, and then back to the environment. Now, here we're going to talk about the mechanism of inhalation. So how the inhalation inside your body takes place is that first you must understand one thing. Your lungs are contained inside a thoracic cavity. This thoracic cavity are the space surrounding your lungs, and they are contained by your rib cage. So anything that is above the diaphragm are actually inside a tiny jar. And this tiny jar can be represented by a glass jar, rubber membrane, and balloons inside them. So what you do, as you pull the rubber membrane or you push the rubber membrane up, what happens is that this rubber membrane will cause the pressure inside here to increase, causing the balloon to deflate. But if you pull it downwards, what happens is the pressure inside here now decreases and the balloon can expand. Similar mechanism we can see in our respiratory system, where inside here, the first thing that is happening is that the diaphragm muscle contracts. This contraction of your diaphragm muscle allows for the diaphragm to be flattened, And what happened here is that now your diaphragm is flat. The pressure inside your thoracic cavity decreases. So this pressure inside the thoracic cavity, as it decreases, it allows for the pressure from the environment to push the air into your lungs. So now what happened is your nostril is open. So the air enters the respiratory system. And then what happens is that your volume of air in lung increases. So here you have expansion of lung. And finally, what we see is that during inhalation, you can see, and you can try it yourself, is by taking in air, you will experience that your chest is moving up and outward. So here we have chest moving out and upward. And another thing, you have your intercostal muscle contract and relax. So this is everything that is happening during inhalation. Pause. Now we're going to take a look at what happened during exhalation. Exhalation is just a reverse process of what inhalation is. So now we're going to talk about how your diaphragm relaxes. So as your diaphragm muscle relaxes, the diaphragm moves upward. Now this causes the pressure in thoracic cavity to increase. And this pressure in the thoracic cavity, as it increases, it pushes the air in lungs out of the body. So what happens is that your lungs deflate as the volume decreases. Here, the same thing that is happening. The chest, instead of moving upward and outward, your chest moves downward. And inward. And your intercostal muscle will carry out contraction and relaxation. Now, this is just a passage of air starting from your nose down to your trachea to the lungs. Now, inside the lung, a different mechanism is taking place. A different phenomenon is taking place, where gases exchange occur directly through your alveolus. So now we're going to talk about the alveolus. The alveolus is a special balloon-like structure that is found at the end of your bronchiole. And this alveolus, it's similar as how air sac in the insect. It's actually a sac of air that is rich in blood capillary. They have large surface area. They are moist in nature. And your blood capillary is also numerous. Of course, when we talk about blood capillary, it is one cell thick. Now, what happened here is that you have red blood cells coming from the heart. As the heart pump red blood cell towards the lung, what happened is that this red blood cell reach in carbon dioxide. They are called the deoxygenated hemoglobin. Or another name for it, you can call it the carbamino oxyhemoglobin. And this red blood cell carry carbon dioxide to the alveolus. Now, what happened here is that this carbon dioxide concentration inside the red blood cell is much higher compared to alveolus. But we don't use the term concentration when we are writing our essay. Instead, we use the term the partial pressure of CO2 is higher in blood than in alveolus. Now, as you can see that this higher partial pressure is similar as high concentration. And we've learned in chapter 3 that the movement of particles, movement of substance throughout your membranes are always from high concentration to low concentration. So similarly for your carbon dioxide, what happened is that the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in this red blood cell is much higher compared to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the alveolus. So what happened is that the carbon dioxide then move into the alveolus. So here, what happened? Your carbon dioxide diffuses out of cell